Meanwhile, President Obama has pledged to retaliate against Russia for interfering with the presidential election. Intelligence officials concluded last week that hackers working for the Kremlin gained access to the emails of some top Democrats, including one of Hillary Clinton's closest campaign advisors. The president says that some of the actions against Moscow will be overt, others will not.
I think there is no doubt that when any foreign government tries to impact the integrity of our elections, that we need to take action, and we will, at a time and place of our own choosing. Some of it may be explicit and publicized, some of it may not be. But Mr. Putin is well aware of my feelings about this because I spoke to him directly about it. And there is among the big powers, there has been a traditional understanding of that everybody's trying to gather intelligence on everybody else.
President Obama made those comments during a wide-ranging interview with Steve Inskeep of National Public Radio. And Steve, the host of Morning Edition, good enough to join me now from Washington. And Steve, so very much to get to. I do actually, though, want to begin with the election now passed, one that we had heard for months and months would turn on turnout. The president acknowledged that in his interview with you, but you asked actually if it also wasn't perhaps a question of for which argument they would show up. What did he think?
Well, the president is not suggesting that the Russian hacking actually changed the election result directly. He's not claiming it's an illegitimate election. He said that specifically in the interview. He's not among those who is saying that Trump is not a legitimate president or will not be a legitimate president. But what he is saying is that the Russian hacking was so positioned as to take advantage of the debate in the United States. He argued that the media and politicians and, in effect, the voters paid attention to the wrong things, paid attention to a lot of distractions, such as the items in hacked Democratic National Committee emails, which the president would argue were not as significant as real substantive issues, and that by paying attention to the wrong things, the election was affected, even though he thinks it was a legitimate result by millions of voters who voted as they did.
You know, in discussing the media, Steve, of which Donald Trump has been so critical, he, of course, lauded his electoral college victory and took a shot just yesterday. It should be noted that the president himself had something of a reticent relationship with the very same media during his time in office. Does he, however, believe, aside from focusing on the wrong things, that that the culture of media itself was in part to blame for Hillary Clinton's defeat?
Oh, definitely. He's got a critique of the media just as Donald Trump has a particular critique of the media. Trump's being that the media are biased against him or against conservatives, and Obama's being that the media are paying attention to the wrong things. And Obama's thinking more of the conservative-leaning media like Fox News and outlets like that, and people producing fake news, bogus news stories. They each have their critiques. You mentioned Obama's restrictiveness. This is something that all presidents have in common. There are ways they make themselves very accessible and also inaccessible. Obama was criticized for being very restrictive and also in some cases for pursuing prosecutions against people who leaked information to the media. At the same time, he must have done hundreds of interviews. He did a number with me. He did a number with your colleague, Steve Croft of CBS. He's done a lot of interviews, a lot of press conferences, but been restrictive when it suited his purposes. For example, limiting White House photographers. We may end up seeing something similar from Trump, who was extremely available when it suited him during the campaign, and in recent months has been extremely unavailable compared to presidential candidates and president-elects in the past.
I was struck, too, that he at one point admitted to you essentially a bias of a sort on the part of Democrats toward national and international issues. It seemed an acknowledgement, however tacit, that perhaps they all bear some responsibility for the Democrats' loss.
Oh, yeah. He said he took some responsibility for the emphasis of the Democratic Party, the idea that Democrats are thinking about global issues, thinking about the planet, thinking about climate change, thinking about global trade. And he's arguing that perhaps Republicans were better at tapping into local concerns like the factory that closed years ago in a particular Ohio town. There's going to be a big argument that I can sense developing now over water regulations. And the Democratic view of that is going to be that rivers and waterways need to be regulated to avoid pollution. The Republican point of view is going to be, why are you regulating this particular tiny stream on my land in the middle of Nebraska, say? And so that argument is going to continue. But the president is contending that Democrats, if they're going to do better, need to be able to show up in local communities, talk to local voters in remote and rural and more conservative areas, but just as important, he said, listen to them and understand what their concerns are so that Democrats frame their ideas and their policies in the ways that take more conservative or more rural or older voters into account.
Now, we also heard just a bit of the discussion that you had with him regarding Russian meddling in the election, to be specific. Something that we actually heard Hillary Clinton blame on a personal beef that she ascribes to Vladimir Putin. How did he parse the impact of it all on the election we saw?
He ducked. As far as Vladimir Putin's motives, he didn't want to talk about that, at least right now. We know what the CIA thinks. We've heard different versions of what the FBI thinks about this. The president stayed aside, at least for now, from the motives of Russian President Vladimir Putin. But the U.S. intelligence agency has said the hacking was approved at the highest levels of the Russian government. And the president felt that there was an effect on the election in this indirect way that I described, that people who were already involved in the political process, legitimately part of the political process, paid attention to the shiny objects, as the president says, the items in various emails, and sort of lost the idea that Russians were trying to influence an American election.
You asked him if the presidency as a position had grown too powerful, especially as it regards executive orders. If it has, it happened in part on his watch while he was in office. What did he have to say about that?
He did not acknowledge that he had necessarily made the presidency more powerful. But it's undeniable that the presidency has become a lot more powerful over time. This has been of special concern to conservatives, particularly when there's a Democrat in the White House. Maybe they're a little less worried when there's a Republican, and we'll see, because there's a president coming in who wants to be very active. But President Obama suggested that his successor should avoid, if he can, what President Obama ended up doing. President Obama tried to work through Congress to get things that he wanted, and when he failed on subjects like immigration, he used executive actions, executive orders. He contends that he was doing things that were within the law, within the Constitution, but he acknowledges that that means that his actions are less permanent. One result of that is that his successor certainly can reverse them if he wishes, and the president said Donald Trump will have every right, because it's a democracy and because he won, to reverse all the things that President Obama has done by executive action
so
if
many
they
promises
still can
that
be reversed.
So many promises that the president-elect has made for his coming first 100 days. Finally, Steve, you mentioned it. As someone who has sat with him, the president, often for such talks over the years, what struck you about President Obama this time?
He is working very hard to stay cool, to stay calm. In a situation where many people are not feeling calm at all, whether their side won the election or lost the election. This has been an extremely tense time for an awful lot of people. And the president has been focusing on the transition, has been focusing on the nature of democracy, and that's where his thoughts have been going. When he's talking about the effects of the Russian hack, he is thinking about weaknesses in our democratic system which would make it vulnerable to that sort of interference from outside. I think his view is if we had a healthier public debate, it wouldn't be a problem, whatever some Russian propagandist said or whatever some particular hacker did. You wouldn't feel like like it necessarily affected a national election. So his thoughts are very much on that. And in a practical sense, the thing that he knows he needs to get done is a peaceful transfer of power.
Well, it is certainly a great listen, and it is available out there. And
thank you,
Steve. I say this to you, and if you could pass it along to David and Rachel, and of course Renee for so many years, as somebody who spends hours of my week with you, well, each and every morning, can't thank you enough for your time and insight today.
Oh, thanks. I will pass it on to David Green and Rachel Martin and Renee Montaigne. They're fantastic, and it's an honor to work with them. I'm glad you're listening.
Again, thank you. Steve Inskeep of NPR.